Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order when you check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Sports Pictorium Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. If he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL helmet poster. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
Only one man has won as many as 8 Stanley Cup Championships without ever having played for the Montreal Canadiens. His name, Red Kelly. One of the greatest to ever lace up a pair of skates, Kelly was a part of 4 Stanley Cup winners with the Detroit Red Wings and 4 more with the Toronto Maple Leafs. His game compared with some of hockey's most legendary names, Orr, Bourque, Robinson, Potvin, and yet, when we speak of the game's greatest blue liners, so few ever mention the name Red Kelly. Next, on Sports Forgotten Heroes, the story of Red Kelly.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Sports Forgotten Heroes, and today, Red Kelly. And I gotta tell you, I really feel fortunate to bring today's podcast to you because I was able to interview this living legend and share some of what he said with you. Red, as of this recording, is 91 years old. He's not in the greatest health, but he did spend some time with me over the phone. Unfortunately, though, some of what he said is very hard to understand, but some of what he said can be heard, especially if you listen closely. So what I have done is include some of his sound bites with an interview I did with Waxy Gregoire, who co-wrote the book The Red Kelly Story with David Dupuis and Red Kelly. Waxy and I talked about Red for quite some time and covered his career in great detail. Of course, we weren't able to touch upon everything, but you will certainly be able to get a great flavor for the phenomenal career of Red Kelly by listening to today's podcast. And what a career it was. 20 years split between the Red Wings and the Maple Leafs. 8 Stanley Cup championships. He played defense and later center. For his career, he scored 281 goals and added 542 assists. And he won the Lady Byng 4 times. But I'll let Waxy and Red tell you more about this most amazing career. Before we get there, just a reminder that you can learn more about our guests by checking out Sports Forgotten Heroes on the web at sportsfh.com. There we have links to stories, stats, videos, and more about each of the Forgotten Heroes we talk about. You can send in questions, post comments, or you could suggest Forgotten Heroes you'd like to know more about. Follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on Twitter at SportsFHeroes and check out our page on Facebook. Remember, we'd love to hear from you, and please, if you can, give us a 5-star rating. Everything helps. You know, Red Kelly broke into the NHL with Detroit and played for 20 years, finally retiring at the age of 39. He shared the ice with the likes of Rocket Richard, Jean Beliveau, Gordie Howe, Ted Lindsay, Doug Harvey, Terry Sawchuk, and many, many of the game's larger-than-life legends. And as impressive as that is, perhaps even more impressive is the fact that not only was Red playing in the NHL, he was serving his country, Canada, in the House of Commons at the same time. And we'll get to that later on in today's podcast. Now, while we'll hear a little from Red, let's start today's show with Waxy Gregoire. Waxy, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. Thanks a lot for joining me.
Well, you're quite welcome.
Hey,
Pleasure to be on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hey, why did you decide to write a book about Red Kelly, and what did you find most fascinating about him?
Well, the Red Kelly book, Red Kelly, given his age, had never had a book written about him. And, of course, he had been approached many times before, basically declined. It just happened that we were down at the stamp unveiling for the original 6 best defensemen, and we had completed the book on Pierre Pilote. And we met with Red, and David Dupuis talked with Red, and I talked with Red's daughter, Casey, and mentioned, I says, would your father be interested in doing a book? And Casey told me that, yes, he may be interested. So he said, call him in a week or so, which we did. We called him, and we called him a second time, and we basically went to Toronto and visited him with once or twice. And I've since found out later that he even called Pierre to check up on us. He wasn't going to write a book just with anybody, I guess. I don't know. We're not Pulitzer Prize winning writers. But anyway, at his age, and I guess he felt, you know what, maybe it's time to write a book. So we got into writing the book. We did a lot of phone conferences, a lot of interviews, a lot of personal visits, and that's how we accumulated all our information.
How much fun did you and David have writing with him? I mean, this must have been so much fun, especially for a hockey fan, to be able to spend so much time with really one of the game's legends.
It is unbelievable, and you're talking. You're not talking quite the locker room, but you're talking, aspects of the locker room, and you're talking to a man who is devoted and sincere to hockey, and it is unbelievable. Now we met his family, of course. His wife Andrea is just an outstanding lady. We've met the kids, and they're just, really. You could tell by talking to Red what kind of person he was, and he just loved talking hockey.
Well, for those who don't know or don't remember a lot about Red, tell us just how good a hockey player he was. Here's the key to Red. He always put the team first, and it didn't matter what the circumstance was. The team came first. His ego was put aside. He had developed some skills early in his age, a young age, that were brought forward, and he was very fortunate to have good coaches. And when you think back in the 50s, the 40s and the 50s, coaching was at a premium. But he was fortunate enough to have good coaches. He had good pedigree. His father was a good hockey player. Red was always in great shape, better shape than any of the other guys when they came to training camp. A lot of guys came to training camp looking to get in shape. Red came to training camp. He was in shape. It was unbelievable. He learned techniques, but he was able to do things well. And he learned these along the way from midget, junior, St. Mike's. He learned how to pass the puck. He learned how to pass. He learned how to skate backwards properly. And what happened was when he was given instruction, he took it to the next limit and said, you go practice that. Well, Red would go practice that and practice that and practice that. He was devoted to the sport, hockey. Yeah, that came out pretty much in the beginning of the book. But one theme that was throughout the book was just how important his farming was, that his family owned a farm. And we'll get into this a little bit later too, but you mentioned that he was always in shape. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that after each season, he would go home back to the family farm, work there over the off season, then be in shape for the for training camp, correct?
Oh, absolutely. When he describes what is involved in priming tobacco, and then he has to take all the tobacco and climb the ladders and put them in the silos, and they had to be done in so many a day. and then of course there's all the other chores that go on the farming, with your cattle and all that other stuff. He was in shape. It was unbelievable, like what kind of condition he was in.
Mm-hmm.
But the farm life, which he still owns today, was a big part of his life, and man, it sure helped his hockey career.
Mm-hmm. Sure did. Hey, one of the things I do on Sports Forgotten Heroes with several guests is word association. But I usually do it more towards the middle or end of each podcast. However, I wanted to do it up front in this podcast because some of the names that I'm going to bring up, or some of the terms or words that I'm going to shout out here, play a large role in some of the things that we'll be talking about later on. The first one I want to bring up is Stanton Burton. Who was he, and why is he so important in the life of Red Kelly?
Well, Stan Burton was just a local kid that hung around the area, but they had a swamp that they used to play in year-round, whether it be swimming in the swamp hole or it'd be skating on it in the winter. And it just so happens that one time Red wasn't very old, and he jumped into the swamp to cool off because it had been really hot out, and Red was going down for the count. And it was Stan who jumped in the water and basically pulled him out, saved his life.
Right, Red was only about 4 or 5 years old, I think, when that happened.
That's all he was, yeah. That's all he was. But what happened was he got in the swamp and there was current there, and the current was pulling him down. And Stan jumped in, seeing what was going on, and the swamp had some pretty steep kind of hills that you had to go down and come out of, and was Stan that saved his life.
And then, unfortunately, Stanton perished just a few short years later.
Yes, he got killed in a car accident, and that really upset Red when he found out that happened to him,
Mm-hmm. Who is William Conway?
Well, William Conway is, William Conway probably saved Red's hockey career because Red was, when Red first went to St. Mike's, and there's a story how he got there, but when Red first went to St. Mike's, he went and tried out for the Major A team. He got cut. Tried out for the Major B team and got cut. He tried out for the midget team and got cut.
Oh, man.
So he went out and basically just grabbed the skates one day, and they were out scrimmaging. And William Conway, who was basically a scholastic, was out there, a senior student, headed for priesthood. And he convinced Father Flanagan and says, you know what, you may have made a rash decision by cutting Red. I think maybe you should take another look at him. And they did. And when they took another look at Red Kelly, you know what? He says, he's going to be playing on a major team.
Wow. So William Conway really might have salvaged the career of Red Kelly before it ever got started.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Joe Primo.
Joe Primo was a coach that Red Kelly learned so much from while he played with the St. Michael's Junior A team. Joe Primo was an outstanding coach. Red has nothing but praise for him, along with Father Flanagan. And that's when I say that, his coaches that he had locked into turned out to be very important for his development.
One name I want to bring up who plays such a large, perhaps biggest role of all, good and bad, in the Red Kelly story is Jack Adams. And it really did get off to a terrific start. Tell me a little bit about Jack Adams.
Well, I'm like you. There's some good and there's a lot of bad.
But it
anyway,
started off really well. I mean, even to the point
it did
where
start off very well.
Yeah, I mean, he even got him into to see the Detroit Tigers play the Cleveland Indians, and Bob Feller matching or setting the strikeout record in Major League Baseball, and Red got to see that before he was even on the Red Wings because of Jack Adams. So again,
that's correct. That's correct. That really was. Shows you how much, I'll say, power that Jack had or connections throughout the Detroit area. But absolutely. So, I mean, Red Kelly was never going to cause you a problem. And I'm sure that Jack Adams, because he had a lot of bird dogs out there, knew all that. And Red wasn't going to cause him any trouble in the dressing room, on the ice, etc. And Jack Adams would treat him fairly well. Jack Adams was very difficult to get any money from. Now Red got his money in different ways by winning, pile of Stanley Cups, etc. But Red had no beef with Jack Adams until the day he got traded.
Right. I'm going to get way, way ahead of myself because it's a fun story, and I really I just want to touch it briefly. Pyramid Power and Kate Smith.
Well, we all know that the Philadelphia Flyers were started with their superstitions of Kate Smith, because when she came to sing the anthem, they went on a winning record. And you know what? They say, well, we got something good going here. We're not going to stop it. And, people started to buy into this stuff and figure, oh, geez, Kate Smith sings. Philadelphia Flyers win, and we lose. Well, what happened with in Red Kelly's case, he kind of thought of something. Well, you know what? Maybe I can counteract it. But his daughter Casey had problems with headaches and migraines, and they had done some research on about the pyramids to help absolve her of some of these headaches and everything else. So Red decided, well, you know what? I'm going to introduce some of these things into the hockey room and see if it has an effect. And, of course, once the reporters got a hold of it, then they started to really play it up. But while in the playoffs against the Philadelphia Flyers, he started with little pyramids, putting them under the benches. Well, it became fact that the Maple Leafs were hanging right in there. I mean, they were into Game 7. And Red brought a great big pyramid into Philadelphia to help them win Game 7, which we know that didn't happen. But that was the gimmick that he brought forward, just to take the pressure off all the other things that were happening from the other side. Just to take the pressure off, get the guys loose enough to play the game.
Interesting. Okay. We painted a tiny bit of a picture of some of the people and things in Red's life. Now, let's go back to the beginning, at least somewhat at the beginning. In high school, he was a forward and scored a lot. But when he got to the Red Wings, he was moved to defense. Why?
Well, actually, he started on defense in minor hockey in Port Dover. Mm-hmm. He was one of those kids that was better than other kids, and he started playing defense. His first coach, I guess, that kind of got him going was Sidney McQueen. And Sidney McQueen really, even though you're Red Kelly and you're probably the best player on the team, you're going to follow the orders that I hand out. And Red got that message early in his career. When he went to St. Mike's, this is when Father Flanagan put him on up front. Mm-hmm. They put him up front. He had trouble turning and skating backwards. So Father Flanagan put him through a series of exercises to get him turning on one side and skating backwards, but he had him playing up front. So he had experience playing back, but he was playing up front, and he played up front most of his career at St. Mike's before he got to Detroit. Now, he goes to Detroit, and he's automatically playing defense. Mm-hmm. Now, he played 4 years at St. Mike's, but he's gone to Detroit. He did have Ed Stanford and him did play a little bit of defense for Joe Primo. at St. Mike's. And it was Joe Primo that left him there. Ed Stanford moved up, but Red stayed on defense. So he goes to Detroit, and he's playing defense.
But why? Why the move to defense? What was it that Jack Adams saw in his game that said this guy's got to play defense and not be a forward?
He improved so much his backward skating from Joe Primo that they could see that his mobility, he's able to. He had vision on the ice a little bit better than anybody else. He could carry the puck. He would move a pass up right on the guy's tape. He had all the qualities back there. Now, we know of Bobby Orr. Well, Red Kelly can move the puck up. And that was one of the strong points in Detroit. Defense didn't hang around with the puck in their end. They got it up and they got it out. And Red Kelly wasn't afraid to carry the puck. He was defense first, but he was still an offensive defenseman.
You know, throughout his career as a player in particular, dating all the way back to high school, Red really played on teams that only knew one thing, and that was how to win hockey games. So during his high school career, the majors, he won a lot of games, didn't he?
Well, when they won the major championship, they won the Junior B championship. They lost the first Memorial Cup in Major A in the finals. But then again, the year after, they turned around and they won the Memorial Cup. So he was always in the thick of it, always winning. So his 4 years at St. Mike's were very, very successful. Now we move on to Detroit.
And when he gets to Detroit, right away, he makes the team on his first try in training camp. How big or unusual was it that a guy right out of high school makes the team like that?
Very, very unusual. Very unusual. Matter of fact, sometimes you don't even get through training camp and they're already sending you down. They've already got a place for you. They know you're going to Omaha or Edmonton or wherever. And in Red's case, it was they seen something. They kept him as a fifth defenseman. And then his break came when one of his buddies broke their leg halfway through the year. Doug McQueen breaks his leg.
Yeah, he
had
Red is. Go ahead.
Red's now in part of the top four.
I was brought up as a fifth defenseman out of juniors. We just won a Memorial Cup. First training camp I've gone to. And they took me to Detroit the last minute as a fifth defenseman. And they used disparagingly, any big face-off came, well, they'd change you and put out the regular defenseman. But around Christmas time, one of the defensemen broke his leg. Now they had to use me as the fourth defenseman. And they saw that I could do the job. And so I played in all kinds of situations, and the next year they gave me number 4, and I said I was happy with 20. I wondered why they wanted to change it. They said one number was easier to carry than 2. I then had 4 for 19 years.
So that was Red Kelly. As you could hear, his health isn't the greatest. And as I mentioned in the open of today's podcast, it was a thrill just to speak with him. What he was saying here is that he did break camp with the Red Wings on his first try as the team's fifth defenseman. Detroit assigned him the number 20, and after his first season, they gave Red the number 4, which is the number he wore for the rest of his career. Red went on to explain how he became one of the team's top 4 defensemen because of an injury. Now, we'll hear more from Red later, but right now, back to Waxy and the fact that Red received a lot of praise right away. Bill Quackenbush said he could control the puck with his feet better than any player could with their stick. And Jack Adams said that Red was just about the best coached player he had ever seen. He made quite the early impression. Just how good was this guy as a first-year player?
Well, he was obviously, we know where he finished in the Calder Trophy voting. Because he played defense, was he handicapped a little bit? Hard to say. But this guy he was learning every day, and to your point, he was so well coached through St. Mike's that when they got him, and of course Detroit didn't get a lot of guys from St. Mike's because Toronto had their nose in on all those places.
Mm-hmm.
But when they got him, they got a polished player that was just going to learn a little bit more and become the all-star that he was.
And there was more praise. King Clancy was impressed. Again, Jack Adams was impressed. Some thought, as you just said, that he might win the Calder Trophy, the Lady Byng Trophy, the Hart Trophy. I think Red Kelly was just one of those special talents who just had it. I don't know what it is, but some guys, they have it. A guy who stars right away, is at the top of his game and continues to improve. Now, I'm not saying that he is a Bobby Orr or a Wayne Gretzky or a Mario Lemieux, but when you look back on his immediate contribution to his team and just how good he was, he's not that far off. So how good was he, especially early on? Can you paint a picture for us of how quickly he acclimated to the NHL game and then exceeded the talents of so many around him?
Well, you're absolutely right. And the fact that he was such a strong team player, easily coached. I mean, Tommy Ivan had no problem with this guy, and he was learning. His situations for his improvement was, it happened so quick with this guy that he could adjust and adapt, to point where you're absolutely right. How can you become a regular player in your first year, given the fact that there were so few jobs and so many good players out there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, remember there was only 6 teams back then. You had the Canadiens, the Maple Leafs, the Rangers, the Bruins, the Blackhawks, and the Red Wings. That's it. You didn't have 31 or soon to be 32 teams playing in the NHL. This was the era of the original 6, and this guy gets up there and he's kicking butt.
Red Kelly was a tough guy. First of all, he was no pushover. Even for a young kid, he was a tough guy. He learned his reputation, and they didn't call him Cornflakes Kelly for no known reason. Not only that, he was enthusiastic, and he never quit. Didn't matter what the score was. Never quit. Never left the ice surface early. He was a battler, and his whole objective was to win. The team wins. We win.
What was he, especially early on, let's talk about this, was he more of a classic defensive defenseman? Was he an offensive defenseman? What were the strengths and or weaknesses of his game?
Well, I think that's the key, that he was an all-around defenseman. He would do the offensive stuff, but he knew when to stay home and take care of business. And he adjusted to the different players' maneuvers, and there's a great story we talk about. When the Rocket Richard beat him once, he didn't beat him again because I figured that move out. And Red Kelly would tap it into his brain. He got to know all these guys' moves, and he just had a vision and a sense that not everybody could adapt to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All these qualities make him a really great player, yet he doesn't have the flamboyance of a big scorer. he's going to hit your tapes, etc. But he's not going to be the he didn't get the big goal of the 7th game of the Stanley Cup, etc.
I wonder if
it takes away from.
No, go ahead.
It just takes away, from the exuberance of some of the other guys they rate.
Yeah, because, you mentioned Rocket Richard, and everybody that's a hockey fan knows the name Rocket Richard. But and Gordie Howe as well, and in many circles, Doug Harvey. Now, granted, these guys played back in the 40s, the 50s. But let me ask you this. Why do you think, outside of immediate hockey circles, Red Kelly is not as highly regarded or as well remembered as he probably should be? What was it about his game that didn't spark the kind of memory of a Gordie Howe, a Rocket Richard, those kinds of players? And he was just as crucial to the success of his team as those guys were to their team.
Absolutely. I think a lot had to do with the kind of coverage that was going on. We know that Toronto and Montreal got, coverage that places like Chicago and maybe Detroit newspapers covered Red, but the rest of the hockey world wasn't seeing it as much. Detroit did have a bunch of other guys that they probably were focusing on, like the production line. So, Gordie Howe and Ted Lindsay would have got a lot of the cream, and there's so much of the pie we're going to talk about. And yet, Red would be in the category of a Doug Harvey, and Doug Harvey was raved about all the time. Why wasn't Red given the same accolades? I think it's the way the paper was covering these guys. They might have 30 reporters in Toronto. They might have, 4 or 5 in Detroit.
Interesting. So perhaps had Red come up with a Montreal or a Toronto instead of a Detroit, he might be a much better known and better remembered player.
I would think so. Yet Detroit had a very, very powerful team. And, of course, it started from the net out. There was a lot of good players in that team with a strong supporting cast. So, it's easy to, when your team is doing so good, it's pretty easy to, overlook a good play played by a defenseman, yet it was occurring day in and day out.
Yeah, and they weren't awful, but they weren't nearly as good prior to Red joining them. And when he first joined them, how key was Red to their success? I mean, they finished the regular season in first place each of his first 7 years. 7 straight years they finished in first. That was a record up until that point. How key was Red to their success?
Well, he was key in the fact that a lot of those guys were growing together. Was Gordie Howe had been there a year before. All these guys were maturing together, coming from different areas that the Red Wings farm systems had. And it just seemed that, all your draft picks are coming into fruition, and here we go. They were very well coached with Tommy Ivan. They had a real strong system and a strong team. Now, we know that Jack Adams tinkers with that from year in to year out, but I mean, they were the team in the early 50s. There was no doubt about it. They lost here and there, but they were the most powerful team.
And this, to me, is one of the most remarkable statistics about Red Kelly. And I think this statistic goes to show you just how good or how key he was to the success of his teams. He played hockey in the NHL for 20 years, and only once did he miss the playoffs, and that was the 1958-59 season. And I think that was the year where he played with a broken ankle for most of the second half of the season. Heck, he won the Stanley Cup 8 times, and that's a record for a player who never skated with the Montreal Canadiens. What was it about his game that not only made him such a success, but those around him as well. He made every player around him that much better, didn't he? What was it about his game?
It was his attitude to the game. We play as a team. We play to win. He had the talent, and then when he went to Toronto, of course, he brought that experience. At that time, Toronto was bringing in a bunch of new guys as well. I mean, the timing that he went to Toronto with his experience to bring those young guys into the system was just perfect timing. And Toronto's, I mean, they brought him in Toronto for one reason. I mean, Punch Himloff knew what he was doing. But Red Kelly, the years that they won in Detroit was just such a solid player back there that, I mean, we talk about Terry Sawchuk being a great goalie. Well, they had defense keeping that puck away from him as well. Mm-hmm. They had a solid team effort. His whole demeanor of never giving up, he was just his attitude was the team wins. We got to do it for the team. We're going to win.
And they did. They had some other great players on there. I mean, you just mentioned Terry Sawchuk. They had Ted Lindsay. They had Gordie Howe. Some of the defensive partners he had. Who are some of the players on the Red Wings, and how good was that team?
Well, that team was outstanding, and I recall talking to Red, and he said, he says one of the best things we had going for us was we had a third line. Our third line could shut down. They went out there for one reason. They shut down the Rocket. They shut the Rockets line down, but they had guys on their team like Alex Delvecchio, Bob Goldham come over from Chicago when a trade. He was a good defenseman, stay-at-home defenseman. I mean, of course, we got Ted Lindsay, and Marty Pavlich was one of those guys that could skate unbelievably fast. Marcel Pronoble was playing defense, and then Jack Adams, of course, he moved guys in and out all the time. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, when they had the production line, I mean, Sid Abel was there early on, and then Alex Delvecchio came in. They had a solid core of guys, as we know, that kind of arises today, where you have to have a solid core, and you work around that. After Detroit did that, and I mean, they got rid of some good players. They had some good defense when they got to Jack Adams, started trading Jack Stewart and Leo Reese. He brought other guys in, but you got to consider that Terry Sawchuk and Red Kelly, the production line, I mean, they were a powerhouse. Mm-hmm. These are all all-stars.
Mm-hmm. Waxy, one of the things I really enjoyed about your book was you learned a lot about the game, season by season, how good the Red Wings were, and you covered a lot of the game. But what you also weaved in and out of the game was a lot about his personal life. And I want to get back to that for a moment, because there were some things that were happening off the ice that certainly affected his performance on the ice. And one of them was the courtship with the woman he would ultimately marry, Andra McLaughlin, who was a skater. And he basically met her by accident, and their courtship took years. And it wasn't until Red broke his jaw that it finally became permanent. Well, I guess sort of. Tell us about his relationship with her. Didn't at one point Andra walk away from their engagement, tour the world, and then Red actually proposed to another woman before breaking off that engagement? And Andra's mother, she wasn't happy that Andra married Red. In fact, she had encouraged Andra to continue her skating career and not marry Red at all. Their wedding was somewhat secretive. Talk about the entire relationship there if you can.
Well, you're absolutely right that they had gone out. It was more of a male courtship than anything else. By mail, when Red first met Andra, Red was asked by Gordie to go and meet Barbara Ann Scott, who was all rumors were that Gordie was involved with her. And which wasn't true. And when they got to the meeting, and Andrew's mother was there, was Andrew and her mother, and I believe her brother, Barbara Ann Scott, wasn't even there. And that's when the first look occurred. But there was some years of difference between Andrew and Red at the time. And then I guess a few things occurred where Red met her a couple times when she was in skating and asked her out for some calm dates, etc. And as you say, the courtship just went on and off. She was on contract with Ice Review, and I don't know if she couldn't even get married because of this contract. She had to keep skating, whatever. And her mother wanted Andrew to pursue her career in ice skating, etc. But Andrew had a feeling for Red, and it was a real, one of those mixed feelings. Red was such a patient and a docile man, and you're right, he went out with this lady, went out with his doctor's daughter, and I don't know if he thought maybe he had to get married because it was his age and time, but he knew it wasn't right, and he broke off that engagement. And it was the fact that they did become engaged. Andrew and Red did become engaged, but because of Andrew's skating, she gave her ring back to her father to send back to Red, and she says, I'm going to go to Europe and Africa, and she went away for 14 months.
Wow.
And thought all along that the father had sent the ring back. And the father knew that Andrea really loved Red. The father knew. The mother was in agreement, but the father knew. And so when she came back from her tour, and she wasn't going back skating anymore. She said to review ice skating, she said, "No, I'm not going back anymore." And then she actually called Red up and asked him.
So she sort of proposed to him at that point.
Yeah. Is it too late? And Red said, "Is it too late for what?" Too late to get married. And so, boom. Man, oh man, it happened in a hurry. And ironically, it was happening so early on the 4th of July that the arrangements had to be made so quickly that Jack Adams actually gave her away at the wedding. And nobody from Andrew's family was at the wedding. Because Red's parents were close by, they were able to attend. So this really upset Andrew's mother. But
she did. But Andrew didn't want her mother to know at that point either, did she?
Well, she really didn't know because her mother wasn't totally, but in favor of it. But she was moving on. Her father knew. Her father didn't say anything. And then when the mother found out in the paper, the mother was really upset. Really upset, and there was a point in time where the mother and Andrew didn't talk a whole lot until she was about to conceive her first child. And Red actually patched up the relationship, and ever since that time, it's nothing but solid and positive.
Now, during the time of this, we'll call it a courtship. For the most part, it was good for Red, but there was a short period of time where I think it might have affected his on-ice performance. Is that true?
I don't know if it did or not. I know that the year that he was hurt a couple of times. Of course, we know about the broken jaw, and we know the last year before he got traded, the broken ankle. But the team was suffering as a whole. They had a lot of injuries, and believe it or not, when I talk about Red as being as a team player, he was asked to move up, play forward because they knew he could, which he did. He said, whatever the team wants me to do, I'll do. So he moved up and played up front. Now, it cost him some money because when it came time for the All-Star voting, the reporters didn't know if he was playing up or back, so they gave the nod to Bill Gadsby. which would basically cost Red $1,000. When you look at it, because he said, but I do it for the team. If they want me to play up, I play up. So the team wasn't doing very good. Now, of course, we know before Red got traded, there was all kinds of political activity going on with the team. Mr. Norris had passed away.
Right. I want to get into that in just a moment about the Norris family. Yeah. First, I just want to get to this one other point. I think Red was really a homebody. He wasn't like a lot of the other professional athletes that once they get into whether it's hockey, baseball, football, basketball, and they get away from home and they're out on the road, their lives change a lot. But I don't think Red was that way. I mean, he was a real family man, and as we talked about early on, he returned to the family farm every off season. What kind of person is Red Kelly? Who is he? And to prove just how gentle he was, he also won the Lady Byng 4 times and was top 5 in voting on several other occasions. Who is Red Kelly? What kind of person is he?
Red Kelly is, first of all, he has different beliefs. Family is probably number one. He's very strong in his faith. He's a Catholic. He's very strong in his faith. He is strong patriot, very strong patriot. He's a team player to the team, and those are inbred in him right from his grandfather, his father, his mother, etc. And Red never smoked, never drank, and as you know, you read the book, he never swore.
Which is incredible. I mean, when you're playing ice hockey and you never swear, that's amazing.
Yep. I never swear, and I'm sure he heard it when he was coaching, a lot of it in the locker room, but that's the kind of man he was. He was a sound person, and that's how he gained his respect. I mean, when they went on the road to, as you say, a lot of guys would be out fooling around and everything else, not Red. I mean, he might have got together with the team, and they had Ted Lindsay started things up like we're going to go bowling together. We're going to go bowling as a team. Mm-hmm. Wives and girlfriends were invited, and there might have been some guys, having a few pops, etc. But not in Red's case. He was lucky to have on a warm day in the summer after doing haying, 1 beer. Now he did enjoy dancing. He loved dancing. Mm-hmm. He loved dancing. He loved singing. Mm-hmm. It was part of his Irish background. Mm-hmm. But as you point out, family and that goes to his mother and father and siblings, and to this day, they are still very strong.
That's so cool. All right, back to the ice, back to the Norris family, and this is one of the more interesting things that I found in your book that I had no idea. The NHL only had 6 teams, as we talked about, the original 6. But ownership of those teams was very convoluted. And I had no idea about this. Like the Norris family had its hands in like 50% of the league. Talk about that and how it worked, especially between Bruce Norris and Marguerite Norris after their father passed away. How does one family have its hands in the ownership of so many franchises? How did it work back then?
Well, Mr. Norris, the father, was a tycoon, had a lot of money. And he bought these teams when they were on the downside of things, both Detroit and Chicago, and he invested in Madison Square Gardens, and so he had a lot of money invested, which made him a very powerful man. When he passed away, of course, Margaret was basically, I believe, half sister to Bruce Norris. And anyway, Margaret was given the Detroit franchise, where her other brother, Jim Norris, was given the Chicago Blackhawks, and now he was more of a. He liked to set up fights and everything else, and was known to hang around with some really selective company where, maybe from the underworld, etc. So he was kind of, I would say, a conniver. And then, as it turns out, Bruce didn't have a very great reputation either. And unfortunately, Bruce kind of squeezed Margaret out. Maybe 1 or 2 years after she had been maybe because she was a woman, they didn't think she could handle it, but Bruce had her squeezed out, and the mother kind of supported that whole idea. Margaret became the vice president, but basically said zero. And Red really liked Margaret. He thought the world of Margaret. Anyway, Bruce came in, and he was known to have a pop or two. And things started to change. Even though Jack Adams was still there, Bruce started to throw some influence on the franchise. And then one of those things that occurred was that his brother needed help in Chicago. And I don't know if Jack Adams was ordered, but a lot of trades occurred with Chicago to support the Chicago Blackhawks because they weren't doing very good at all. And now we know the story of what happens to players like Ted Lindsay and everything else, and that was they all ended up in Chicago, of course.
Yeah, how does the league not step in and do this? What prevented the Norris family from saying, "Well, I'm going to take all these good players and put them on this franchise and let this franchise be a little bit weaker"? How does the league, manage this?
I know that Clarence Campbell, even though he was president of the NHL, was really under the directorship of the owners. And we know that Conn Smythe is a strong voice, and Conn didn't really care as long as his team was doing good. Montreal had its own issues, but they just let it go because of the financial strength they had. And yet Chicago wasn't doing too good. New York Rangers weren't doing very good. And, they seemed to be at the bottom all the time. So I guess maybe provide a little parity, yet it's not going to upset anybody because the teams aren't that good.
And what about Jack?
How they get away with it? How they get away with it? To your question, is beyond me.
Yeah, I would just think that the other owners would say, now, wait a minute, because there really was nothing stopping from the Norris family from stacking one team against and leaving the other team barren so they could, the Norris family could have, if they wanted, they could have stacked one team, and that team could have really challenged the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs for superiority in hockey all those years. I sort of guess they did with the Red Wings, that they had so much talent, but they could have made that team even stronger had they wanted to.
They probably could have, but I think the older brother had just a little bit more influence on his younger brother. I don't think that was going to happen.
Yeah, I just find that whole thing really, really interesting. Hey, what about Jack Adams? Certainly a great evaluator of talent, but and as we talked about earlier, he wasn't a very patient man, and he certainly didn't like players who rocked the boat no matter how good they were. Tell us a little more about Jack and the relationship he had with Red and how it ultimately soured.
Well, Jack Adams had it happened to him in the 30s when he stayed pat with his teams, and they became affected by not winning again. So he came up with a philosophy that he is not staying pat with his team. So they might win the Stanley Cup, but he's moving some players after that year, and he did it in every year. And it got to the point where players knew it. They knew that you know what, I could be the guy gone, because he moved guys after every year. Not a question about that. And of course, we all know that when Ted Lindsay started the Players Association, but there were signs of that, and Jack Adams takes the C off Ted Lindsay, and And he went to Red Kelly and he says, "I want you to be the captain for a year." And Red didn't want to be the captain. So I don't want to be the captain. I don't want to offend Ted. Jack Adams was using Red and other players to try to bring Ted Lindsay into line. We all know eventually Ted Lindsay gets traded along with Glenn Hall. And Glenn Hall was another one that didn't cow down to Jack Adams, basically. And probably one of the reasons why he got traded. He more or less told him where to go. And then Gordie Howe became captain for a year or two. So Jack Adams was playing head games with the players, and then we all know that not Red Kelly, but Ted Lindsay, when he first started up the Union, a lot of the teams were shifting all their players. The disturbers, I would say, like Jimmy Thompson, those guys, they were all shipped to Toronto or to Chicago. Mm-hmm. The only guy that didn't go was Doug Harvey because Frank Selke said that they'll hang me in Montreal if I send him there. He was. So Jack Adams was, and I think part of that came from the Norris family because Jack Adams was playing with the. My understanding is that he played with the finances of the team, and his take of his own pay may have came from the contracts where he signed and kept the players really down. I mean, Jack Adams it was known that he was very upset when as the Detroit Red Wings kept winning, they had to match bonuses, and that took a lot of money out of Detroit. So,
interesting.
Jack Adams was, not afraid to do the maneuvering and play games, I guess, would you say? And when Red had an interview with a reporter, and Red didn't think that it was going to hit the papers, and it did. And Jack Adams was not very happy with the fact that Red claimed that he had played on a broken ankle, and that hit the papers. And Jack Adams was known to have all the reporters in his back pocket, except for this reporter, who was from Toronto, and got the real story of the Red because the team had been playing so poorly. Mm-hmm. And, of course, we know that shortly after, Red was on the trading block.
Incredible that you could trade someone so key to your team. And we'll get to that in just a moment. Like we said earlier, Red played for 20 years. And over the course of 20 years, you're going to play in some very significant games. But one of them was particularly significant, and it happened shortly after Rocket Richard was suspended. Would you tell us about that game, what happened, and the significance of that game?
Well, in Rocket had played in the Boston game, and they got in a big brouhaha, and Rocket, of course, got suspended. And then it's not the first time he'd been in some kind of altercation, but it was known that he had struck the linesman, and Clarence Campbell had suspended him. So when Detroit went into Boston, and of course, both teams were fighting for first place. They were pretty close in the standings, and Boston, should say that Detroit had to win. They went into Montreal. I believe it was St. Patrick's Day, and Boston got up on an early lead, 4-1, and then all along, Clarence Campbell was warned not to go to the game, but he stubbornly insisted on going, and as it would have it, Detroit got up early in the game, 4-1, and then partway through the period, you knew that there was tension, and you knew that something was going to happen. And Mr. Campbell sat down with his girlfriend, and Red tells me, he says, you could sense that there was something going on, even though we're playing on the ice, and then all hell broke loose, and that's when the tear gas flew, and they had to get to the dressing rooms. Even had to put towels underneath the door because the smoke from the tear gas was coming into the doors. Then they got a message from Frank Selke that said that the game had been defaulted to Detroit and to clear the building.
And that was a key win
as
for
fast.
Detroit, right? That was a key win for Detroit, too.
That was a key for win, give him first place. And then get dressed and get back to the bus, and we got to get out of here as soon as possible. And they even took a different route to get out of the bus because of the crowds, and they had to find a different way to get to the train station to get out of Montreal, and they could hear the crowd rioting, etc.
Wow.
So it was a scary time.
Sure. You know, I think it might be hard to say that any one season was his best, but the 1953-54 season really, stuck out to me. It certainly has got to rank up there as one of Red's best seasons. Can you talk about 53-54 and just how good Red was that year? He won the Norris, the Lady Byng. He was second in the Hart Trophy. Could have been his best year ever.
Absolutely. Not only that, he was up for the running of the most valuable player.
Right, the Hart.
I believe he finished second. But he was playing like almost 45 minutes every game. And he was playing against the best players, etc. He was at the peak of his career. There's probably no doubt in my mind that was his best season ever as well. Everything just gelled, and he was healthy. I don't know what else you can say that everything just went for him.
Let's talk about let's talk about that ankle that we talked about earlier. He broke that ankle during the 58-59 season, and after the season ended, he and Andrea got back together and married. Shortly thereafter, she got pregnant. It was a whirlwind. Interestingly, though, there was a whole lot more to that broken ankle. It was never reported to the press, as you said, and during the 59-60 season, the story finally broke from the reporter, whom you said Jack Adams didn't have in his back pocket. And Adams was none too pleased, and Red Kelly was stunningly traded to the New York Rangers. But he didn't go. Instead, he retired. Talk about that whole episode and how Clarence Campbell intervened, got Red back into hockey, and then what eventually happened.
Well, when Red got interviewed by Trent Fane, the story came out that he had played with a broken ankle. As a matter of fact, I think he only sat out 3 or 4 games, and he had that broken ankle basically the whole year. And when Jack Adams called Red to his office and informed them, and apparently Bruce Norris was standing there watching this stuff and basically said, "We're trading you to New York." And it was at that point in time that Red said, "I'll think about it." And that's when Jack Adams kind of looked him in the face and shoved his finger and said, "You'll think about it. You'll be there tomorrow morning at 8:30. "No, I'll think about it." And Red got up, turned out, walked out of the office, slammed the door, and left. And then he got home and he said, "Boy, what am I going to do?" But he did call. He called Muzz Patrick the next day and said, "Sorry, Mr. Patrick, but I'm not going to New York. I'm retiring." So at that time, he did get the call from a few days later from Clarence Campbell. Basically, Clarence Campbell was kind of threatening him, saying, "If you don't return to New York, you'll be blackballed." And he basically said, "I'm not reporting to New York. You can do whatever you want. I'm retiring." There, and that was basically that's when Toronto got on the phone. Toronto worked a deal out with Clarence Campbell to avoid all this mishap. And Jack Adams got a player in return. But basically, Clarence Campbell didn't do Red Kelly any favors. But he did smooth it out eventually, so Jack Adams got something in return, and Red was off to Toronto. Of course, Eddie Shack was not too happy because he was the guy that was going to Detroit from New York.
So Red actually retired from the game. He didn't want to go to New York, and in this next piece with Red, if you listen closely, he talks about how he was told that he would be blackballed from the game. It didn't matter to him. However, King Clancy got involved and worked out a deal to send Red from Detroit to Toronto. And Red was back at it, only now he was going to play center for the team he grew up watching.
Well, for 10 days, I'd given up hockey for life. Clarence Campbell called me and said, Red, I want you to think about it. He said, if you don't report, Adams wants to suspend you. If he suspends you, you'll never be able to play hockey. In the NHL again, you'll never be able to referee, you'll never be able to coach, you'll never be able to be a stick boy.
Wow.
So I want you to think about it. And I told him I thought about it all night. Went to church in the morning, and before I called Buzz Patrick to him and told him that I wasn't reporting, I was retiring, had nothing to do with New York. I wasn't reporting.
What?
So I played hockey all my life, and now in overnight I gave it up.
Wow.
And so when Clancy called, it was like the sun started to shine again.
Wow. When you got to Toronto, did they change your position from defense to forward? Did you become a winger or a center?
I became a center.
How tough was that to change? And I guess really, why did they make you a center?
Well, playing hockey was playing hockey. Didn't matter where you played. And so I had no trouble playing center. I just continued to play the way I played defense, and so I had no trouble stepping in there. And if I made a mistake, because I haven't been on skates for about 10 days, and there'd be a defenseman behind me to cover up, there was no problem whatsoever moving into center.
Meanwhile, back in Detroit, the trade of Red Kelly was devastating. With Kelly in the lineup, the Red Wings won 4 Stanley Cups, 1950, 52, 54, and 55. After Jack Adams sent Red packing, it was like a curse. Adams did wrong by Red, and it wouldn't be until 1997 until Detroit would once again sip from Lord Stanley's Cup.
Well, it's another part of the demise of the Detroit Red Wings. The dynasty is now unfolding. I mean, there's hardly anybody left that was there. I mean, Ted Lindsay's gone. Sawchuk's getting older. Gordie Howe's basically left on his own. Defense is getting older. Red Kelly leaves, and Detroit doesn't win another Stanley Cup until 2000 and whatever.
You mean 1997, I think it was.
1997. That tells you a lot that when he left, I mean, they lost a big chunk of their D. I mean, they may have been losing some games, etc. But and I don't know how the Detroit Red Wings felt, but I'm sure they couldn't have been happy. The whole franchise was swung around with the intervention of Bruce Norris and some of the moves that Jack Adams was pulling off. Do you
think Jack Adams ever regretted trading Red?
It's hard to say. I don't know if Jack Adams, he may have in his own way, but he had the reporters in his back pocket. He could turn a twist on it any which way he thought. He may have even spread the word that Red was a cancer in the room, etc. I don't know about that. Gave Andrew away just not too long ago, and all of a sudden, all this whole event occurs.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about it is just a couple of months earlier, he gives Andrew away to Red at their wedding, and then a couple months later, their entire relationship, that of Jack Adams and Red Kelly, goes down the toilet. It's permanently wrecked. I don't think probably to this day, well, Jack's been gone for a while now, but I don't think they ever spoke again.
They did not. Red Kelly never spoke to Jack Adams again. Red Kelly was upset the fact that he had given all those years to Detroit. Not that he was looking for a pat in the back, but he was a team player, and he gave everything he had to Detroit. And, they insisted on him playing with a sore ankle or a broken ankle, and he did what they asked him to do. And then because this comes out in the paper, Jack Adams says, I'll show you, and he's going to trade him.
And what a coup for the Maple Leafs. I mean, Red's years with the Leafs were some of the most dominant the Leafs ever had. In fact, he won 4 of his 8 Stanley Cups with them, including 3 straight, 62, 63, and 64. Tell us a little bit about those teams. Who were the key players and just how important Red was to those teams?
They had a few guys in the lineup that had been there for a little bit. Johnny was coming in from the AHL, and then George Armstrong was there. But they had a real young team. And Red comes in, and the smart thing was Punch Imlach has a great discussion with Red. Dave Keon is just a rookie in 61. The Red's experience, he's coming in and he signed, said, we got you in here, Red, and here's what we want you to do. We've got to stop the Montreal Canadiens. They're the team. And we want you to play center, and we're going to put you up against Beliveau because we need to isolate Beliveau because Punch Imlach's experience knew when coaching him with the Quebec Aces how good a player he was, and that was Red's job. Of course, we know how well that was carried out.
Yeah, they moved Red to forward, right? He didn't play defense with the Leafs. He became a forward.
He didn't play defense. He's playing forward. And
Frankie Mahovlich was the beneficiary of that.
He was. The one year that Frank Mahovlich gets 48 goals, and it just happens that he's on his way to 50, and Red gets hurt. And Red doesn't reach that mark with a few games left.
You mean Frank doesn't reach that mark?
Yeah, he doesn't reach that mark, and he may have if Red would have, played out the rest of the year, but he had been hurt. But they had the young players coming in. They had now Alan Stanley come over from New York, so he wasn't a young player. But Tim Horton and Carl Brewer and Bob Bond, Nevin and Keon, they were young guys. Billy Harris. They had a couple of older fellows that were kind of a supporting cast, but they weren't the main guys. So his influence was in the dressing room. Him and Johnny Bauer, and George Armstrong. There was a bit of a turmoil in the dressing room at times because Punch Imlach didn't take any crap. But, Red Kelly always got along with Punch Imlach, and it wasn't until later years, more so the 67, the 66, with a few of the young guys coming in that really didn't get along with Punch Imlach because of his ways of doing things. But if that never bothered Red, Red would just, I'm here for the team. Team wants me to do that. That's what we do. Obviously, it worked out.
Yeah, it sure did. Waxy, one of the things I got to ask, I can't imagine this happening today. One of the more amazing accomplishments about Red's time with the Leafs was the fact that he served Parliament while playing in the NHL. I mean, I can't even fathom a player today being elected to a major political office in his country's, government. Talk about that a little. How the heck was he able to do that? Please explain what election he won, what his responsibilities were, and how hard it was to juggle being a hockey player, a successful hockey player at that, and spending time in the House of Commons. I mean, it's crazy to think that he was able to pull this off.
You asked me earlier what I found maybe outstanding or unique about Red Kelly, and this is it. When he was approached by Keith Davies to run, he said, "I can't run. I'm still playing hockey, etc." And Red met Lester Pearson and was very impressed with meeting Mr. Pearson. And of course, Red never makes a decision sporadically. Red will always tell you, I'll have to get back to you, and he has to think about it. Now, not only was he going to run for politics, he was also married with young children, very young children. So now we got an NHL player that's going to run for politics, and he's got a very young family. And you ask yourself today, who the heck could ever pull that off without getting, hung by your partner or whatever?
Yeah.
And when he ran against a strong person in the York West region who had been the incumbent, and he narrowly beats him out. And the fellow's name was John Hamilton. And the key to Red was he would never miss a meeting in Ottawa. He didn't miss hockey, but he would never miss a meeting in Ottawa because he said, if I miss meetings in Ottawa, there'll be nothing but people sitting there talking about it.
And that's the thing that's the craziest part to this whole story is he wakes up in Toronto, practices, flies to Ottawa, takes in a meeting, gets on a plane, flies back to Toronto, plays in a game, and then the next day he repeats it. It's crazy.
It's crazy. And Andrew found out that trying to figure out when he was eating. So she eventually had to make him sandwiches to take with him because he didn't think he was eating properly. And he'd always take the last ride home after Parliament. It is unbelievable. Now, the second time he ran again. And, of course, he ran against Al Eagleson. Well, I'll tell you, Red was pumped up for that one because he had no use for Al Eagleson. Al Eagleson was saying some pretty, devastating things in the direction, and Al Eagleson threatened, you know what, I'm going to smoke you when it comes to the election. And, of course, we know that didn't happen. And I'll tell you, Red was, in his own way, it was like a hockey game. We won, you lost.
Right.
Red was that fierce a competitor. And that's not the last time he has a bit of a run-in with Mr. Eagleson. But anyway, after his second term, he finally said, I have to retire. And he had 3 young children, but never missed Parliament and never missed a hockey game.
And he was successful on the ice. He was successful on the ice at that time, too. It's crazy. Absolutely.
And was one great story he told me at the time that they had to go to Montreal. And they always played in Montreal on a Thursday night. And he got on a train, and he was really upset because on the way back home after the game, he just barely made the game. And on the way back home after the game, the train got held up because of the FLQ. They were threatening to bomb the train, and so he didn't get in until 5 o'clock in the morning and had to be in Parliament a couple hours later, which Red wasn't very happy about.
Well, it was a tough go. The games were always on Wednesday night, Saturday night, Sunday night. The odd game on a Thursday night in Montreal, very odd. So the House Parliament didn't closed on Friday at 6 o'clock, didn't open till 2 o'clock on Monday. So I was able to make all those games and practices, as many as I could to practice sometimes by myself in Ottawa. It was the only one time there was a game in Montreal on a Thursday night, and Parliament closed on Wednesday at 6 o'clock and then opened till at 2 o'clock the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a Thursday, and the alarm bells went off. We were a minority government, and so there were votes. The votes started at noon, the bells started to ring, and they rang till 6 o'clock that night.
Oh.
And we had votes, and then the assistant speaker of the House had his car, chauffeur waiting outside the door, and I ran out, got in there, and rushed it to the airport, and flew to Montreal, and had a coach and drove me right to the Forum. And I got to the Forum just as the team was going on the ice in warm-up, and so I was able to get dressed in time for the game. And I didn't have any heat or anything. And after the game, the team went back to Toronto, and I got the railway train to Ottawa. And the FL2 and threatened to blow up the bridges. And
wow.
they wouldn't let the trains go through until they checked all the trestles. And so I didn't get into Ottawa until about 5 in the morning. I was rooming with Eugene Whalen and Larry Fennell. And they were just getting up and I was just getting in.
You know, we're talking about a guy who made his NHL debut in 1947-1948, the 1947-48 season. And he was a member of the last Maple Leafs team to win a Stanley Cup. The Leafs won in 1967. Been a long time for Maple Leaf fans. He scored 14 goals and added 24 assists that year, and in the playoffs he had 5 assists. Again, they won the Stanley Cup. He was still a good player at the age of 39. Talk about his final years and why he finally decided to hang up his skates.
Well, he wanted to get that milestone in. 20 years was a pretty good thing. Matter of fact, what people don't recognize that he was offered a contract to stay with Toronto following the 67 year, but he said no. I've had enough. Young family growing up, and his playing days. He knew that you know what? I think he could have still played because of his expansion.
Yeah, that's when the NHL expanded to 12 teams.
That's correct. And, you know, the Over the Hill of the Gang, he talked about the Over the Hill of the Gang and how those guys at their age pulled it off. And he was tired. He was sore. Matter of fact, he had hurt his leg severely in that playoffs. But that's when he decided, you know what, it's time for me to hang it up.
And, of course, he didn't stay away from the game for very long. After he retired, he took on the role of coach of the expansion Los Angeles Kings. Now, the NHL was set up a little different back then. They took the original 6, kept them in one conference, and took the new 6 teams and put them in the other conference. So the expansion teams were guaranteed playoffs, and they were guaranteed that a team would make the Stanley Cup Finals. The Kings made it to the playoffs that year, and they took the Minnesota North Stars to a Game 7 before finally succumbing. How disappointing was that for Red?
I think it was kind of disappointing because they went into Game 7 and he had Terry Sawchuk on his team. I mean, his goaltending partner, Rutherford, had been playing pretty well, but Red figured from previous history that, he's going to be a money goalie. I'm going to put him in Game 7. And unfortunately, they lost, and it was very upsetting to Red. First coaching year, and they lost that game. So he was somewhat upset, and he was disappointed, I guess. The Yuki didn't bail him out. But he got over it.
Sure did, and he coached the Kings for 2 years. Then he went on to Pittsburgh for 3+ years, where he coached the Penguins. He was let go midway through the 72-73 season. It must have been so weird for Red Kelly to not be on the ice. After all, he had just spent 25+ consecutive seasons in the NHL as a player and then a coach. How tough a pill was it for Red to swallow to be let go by the Penguins?
It was. I would say it was devastating, and part of the whole time in Pittsburgh is, he started coaching, and then he became a general manager, and he regrets the decision of taking on that general manager's role because he felt that there's no way that you can do both properly. And at the same time, there was a political uproar in Pittsburgh. There was new ownership taking over, and he'd got along with the previous owners, etc. The new squad came in, and then when he was fired halfway through, it was devastating to both him and the family. Absolutely.
He wasn't gone for long, though. The following season, he was back behind the bench, only this time it was for the team he finished his career with, his beloved Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, how exciting was that?
And how he got hired to coach the Leafs. I mean, it was one of Harold Ballard's reporters that actually called him, and Harold Ballard was in Mailhaven. And the reporter called him up, and it was Dick Beddoes, and said, started talking and kicking around, and would you be interested in coaching the Maple Leafs? And yeah, I'd be interested. And so that's when it first broke that he was interested. And of course, he got offered the job from Harold Ballard, who was in jail.
Regarding Harold Ballard hiring Red Kelly as coach of the Leafs from a jail cell, it's true. Ballard was actually sentenced to prison in 1972 for the misappropriation of funds intended for the use of Maple Leaf Gardens. He was sentenced to 9 years, but only served 1 year and remained the owner of the team until 1990, when he passed away at the age of 86. As for the coaching career of Red Kelly, he coached the Los Angeles Kings, the Pittsburgh Penguins, and his beloved Toronto Maple Leafs. His overall record was 278 wins, 330 losses, and 134 ties. But for the Leafs, he was over 500, winning 133 games, losing 123, and he had 62 ties. Now, of course, he did have some success with the Leafs, especially those playoff series that we talked about way back early on, the Pyramid Power. They played the Flyers in those exciting Stanley Cup playoffs, but after 4 years with Toronto, Red Kelly was finally out of the game. How difficult was it? How tough was it for Red when training camp rolled around in the fall of 1977 and Red, for the first time in 30 years, didn't have a training camp to attend? It must have been one of the oddest feelings he had ever experienced in his life.
I would use that term too, oddest experience, but I don't think he had a regret because Red didn't look back, and Red had a game plan going forward. He had already been involved with some experimental ideas of what he's going to do following his career. I don't think he really regretted it. He just had to get on with his new way of living, and he got involved with a family business. His father-in-law had a business in the United States, and Red started his own maintenance system business on aircrafts, and they started working out of the Pearson International Airport here in Toronto. And he didn't really look back, and I think as far as it would help him get back to his family, a little bit closer to his family than he had been. So Red was never one to look back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he moved forward, and of course, as his career goes on, he's as good at business as he was in his hockey career.
Yeah, well, you would think so. In the end, when we think of the game's greatest defensemen, at least on the periphery, most think about Bobby Orr, Doug Harvey, Ray Bourque, Larry Robinson, even Dennis Potvin, Tim Horton. But not many would say Red Kelly, even though he should be at the top of the list. Why? Why, with all of the accolades, the Stanley Cups, the marks he set, is he not mentioned in the same breath as those guys? He was every bit as good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if it's because you had to be. We know how Bobby Orr's scoring prowess, and he changed the whole game the way he played. I mean, Red wasn't allowed to do that. He had to play under a system. Mm-hmm. But he was such a steady defenseman that he didn't receive all those big accolades that some of them received. And I go back to the kind of coverage he received. There was no TV when he first started in the early 50s. Mm-hmm. You were listening to radio, which is a little different than picking up a game on TV. Having said that, with his all the stuff he's done, it's just this year that he's going to have his sweater retired in Detroit. And we asked the question, what took them so long? Mm-hmm. Ted Lindsay had a ruffle with Detroit, and yet he came back, got his sweater retired. Terry Sawchuk, he leaves, he goes to Toronto, comes back, he gets his sweater retired. And we've always asked the question, what took them so long to bring Red Kelly into retiring his sweater? Who stopped that process? Because this man, if you talk about the Detroit Red Wings in itself, all those Stanley Cups and those championships they won in the 50s, I don't think they win them without Red Kelly.
Well, after reading your book and looking at the stats and doing some research, I don't think that's a far-fetched conclusion. They might have won a Stanley Cup, but they would never have been as dominant without Red Kelly. I mean, they were not a first-place team. And then he comes along, and his first 7 years, they finish in first every year. I mean, he was he was that good.
They praise Nicholas Lidstrom, and I would never take anything away from Nicholas Lidstrom in Detroit because all the moves he made on the ice were very few faults could be tailored to Nicholas Lidstrom. But Red Kelly had the same impact. He played in the power play. He penalty killed. And the other thing that people don't recognize is Red Kelly only had 2 or 3 fights throughout his NHL career. Why so? Well, nobody was really willing to tangle with him. So this guy was, a tough enough defenseman that you're not just going to coast around him without, getting a little visit from him.
Sure.
I mean, this man had all the skills, and you're right. I don't know why he hasn't received. I don't think it's because of his. I think his ego, and it's always been team first. He's not one to, boast about his accomplishments. He does like to talk about the fact that he won 8 Stanley Cups.
Mm-hmm.
Then again, it falls on that it's a team game, and
right.
His team won.
Waxy, there is so much more in your book, The Red Kelly Story, and we just can't touch on everything. It's impossible. We'd be here for hours. I mean, we can't talk about his children, how Casey got her name, Punch Imlock, Harold Ballard, the great series between the Leafs and the Flyers, so much more. And I encourage all of our listeners to pick up a copy of the book, The Red Kelly Story. You will learn so much, and you'll be left scratching your head as to why this guy, Red Kelly, is not more revered. Where can fans get a copy of The Red Kelly Story?
Right now, I believe it's on Amazon. We had copies, but we're kind of out of them. Red Kelly has some copies left if you ever got a hold of Red Kelly. Mm-hmm. And any books we had, we always made sure they were signed.
That's awesome.
Red Kelly signed them all. We would bring, when we got books, we'd bring all our books down to Red Kelly. We'd travel to Toronto, and then we'd sit there and sign 200 books. And anybody who bought a book from us always got a signed copy from Red Kelly. He's just that kind of guy. Never refused an autograph. His autograph is very legible. And that's the kind of guy he is.
Cool.
Never refused anybody. Very
cool. Hey, what are you working on now?
I am working right now with a guy by the name of Brian Trottier. Brian is finally convinced to write his own story. He wants to write it, yet we've already done 36 interviews,
wow.
which are about an hour long in each interview. And now we're just transcribing all the interviews and putting it together. So hopefully we'll have it out sometime next year. This is another guy that's extraordinary.
Awesome. Well, Waxy, thanks again.
Thank you.
I released this podcast on January 22nd, 2019. On February 1st, 2019, the number 4, the sweater that Red Kelly wore for the Detroit Red Wings, scheduled to go up to the rafters to hang beside Howe, Lindsay, Sawchuk, and Steve Yzerman, to name just a few, an honor long overdue. I want to thank Waxy for taking the time to speak with us about Red Kelly. For more on Red, check out the book Waxy co-wrote with Red and David Dupuis, The Red Kelly Story. I would also like to thank the great Red Kelly for taking the time, despite his poor health, to offer us just a tiny bit of commentary about his career. He's a real treasure, and I wish him the best. Next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes, back to the hard court, and a look at a team long forgotten, the Cincinnati Royals. Thanks again for tuning in to today's show, and we'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.